Good morning, good day, good afternoon, whatever time it is, wherever you are, everyone. And thanks for joining us for this edition of the Embry-Riddle virtual guest speaker program, supported by the Center for Career and Professional Development, the Office of Philanthropy, and Eagles in Service, the Worldwide Campus's Veteran Service Organization. As was just mentioned, I'm Eric Rouse. I'm an assistant professor here with the College of Aviation and also a faculty advisor for Eagles in Service. And I'm excited to introduce our alumni, Andrew Tennenbaum, for you. Andrew started his flying career, like many of us, somewhat early, getting his private pilot's license at 17. He graduated from the Air Force Academy and later joined our illustrious organization, getting his master's right here with Embry-Riddle through the worldwide program. He spent 21 years in the Air Force, flying everything from A-10s and C-130s to Harriers with the RAF. He had 3 different deployments to Operation Enduring Freedom, and he continues to fly today as an Airbus 350 first officer for Delta Airlines. But part of what we're going to talk about today is some of the work that he does now based off of what he learned from his time flying and from in the military. And that is what allowed him to found Blue Sky Independent Capital, where he's a financial strategist and educator who uses that systems thinking that we use in aviation and throughout to challenge conventional approaches and to help better understand and help people better understand how capital actually flows through their financial lives. So today, he's going to discuss with us how to rethink your thinking. And so with that, let me hand it over to Andy for his presentation today.
Thank you. I appreciate the introduction. So first, I'd like to thank Embry-Riddle, specifically you, Dr. Eric Rouse, Ms. Monica Scarborough, and Dr. Arnold James for having me here today. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. I know Dr. Rouse already hit on it, but can't help myself. I'm a fighter pilot. I like to talk about myself. So quick background. I am Andy Tennenbaum. I earned a degree in economics from the Air Force Academy and later a degree in aeronautical science from here at Embry-Riddle. I spent 21 years in the Air Force, active duty, reserve, and guard. So all different sorts of organizations and different ways about thinking. And Dr. Rouse said, I flew the A-10 Harrier C-130. But what actually brought me here today started with the lunch. Monica Scarborough had seen a few of my posts on LinkedIn. We met for that lunch and had a great conversation. And at the end, she asked if I'd be willing to come speak here at Embry-Riddle. So here I am. Like Dr. Rouse mentioned, outside of flying, I started a business that focuses on something that most people never really stop to examine, how we think about capital and financial systems. And what I found interesting is that the process that changed about how I think about finances is the exact same process that can be applied to almost any system, whether it's aviation, business, engineering, or finance. So today I'll walk through a very simple framework that has helped me rethink the way systems work. And whether you apply it to aviation, finances, or something completely different, my goal is to leave you today thinking about one system in your life a little differently. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, why are things done the way they are? And maybe more importantly, is that actually the best way? Most systems we operate in, like I mentioned, aviation, finance, education, business, were built for a reason. But systems don't stay static. Technology changes, incentives change, the environment changes. The danger is when we continue operating inside a system without ever stepping back to understand it. So I'll share a few moments from my own life where stepping back, understanding the system, and adjusting how I operated inside of it changed the outcome. I grew up just outside New York City. And like many kids growing up there were very clear expectations about what success looked like. Doctor, lawyer, something predictable. When I applied to the Air Force Academy, my great aunt asked me something I'll never forget. I'll do my best to impersonate her. May not be the best. I'm not good with voices, but what is a young Jewish boy doing applying there? It wasn't meant to discourage me. It was simply the system she understood, the path she believed made sense. But it was the first time I really understood something important. Just because a path is standard doesn't mean it's the right one for you. How many times in life do we follow a path simply because it's what everyone else expects? The deeper lesson about systems came from my father's experiences. He loved machines, motorcycles, racing, aviation. In the 1970s, he became an aviation mechanic, and he was really good at it. But his timing could not have been worse. The aviation industry went through a major downturn. Opportunities disappeared. What I learned talking to my father about that experience was not, don't follow your passion. The lesson was much more nuanced. Passion, without understanding the system around it, creates vulnerability. Sometimes the work doesn't fail. Sometimes the environment changes. The incentives change. The opportunities shift. And if you don't understand the system around your work, the system can make decisions for you. That lesson stayed with me. Early in my career, I had what I called my bull in a china shop phase. If I thought I had the better answer, and if I thought something could be improved, I pushed hard. Sometimes I was right about the improvement, but I was wrong about how systems actually worked. As an exchange officer, I had the opportunity to fly close air support with the Brits. Different doctrine, different assumptions, same mission. Initially, I tried to push the A-10 way without understanding their aircraft and their ways. I realized quickly it was not being well received, and I backed off. It took time, but I learned their system. And something interesting happened. The outcome improved. Once I had a better understanding, my inputs improved and were well received. We almost made it into 4-ship CAS integration, but the Harrier was unfortunately retired before we could see it through. But the lesson became clear. Understanding the system comes before improving it. How often do we try to change something before we fully understand how it works? COVID created one of the biggest system stress tests many of us have seen. Entire industries slowed down or stopped. Airline seniority systems froze. Careers that had been moving along a predictable path suddenly paused. People reacted very differently. Some people panicked, others adapted. The difference wasn't intelligence, the difference was positioning. For me personally, that moment forced the decision. I had the opportunity to go on orders and earn a military retirement. At the same time, I was building seniority with the airlines. Instead of seeing the disruption as purely negative, I started looking at it through a systems lens. What opportunities does this system disruption create? The shift in thinking allowed me to turn what could have been a difficult situation into an opportunity. I was able to retire from the military, continue building my airline career, and begin developing the financial strategy work that eventually became my business today. When systems break, do we only see the disruption? Or do we step back and ask, where is the opportunity inside this disruption? Understanding systems doesn't prevent change, but it helps you position yourself when change happens. As I was retiring from the military and getting ready to move from Arizona to Georgia, I was already thinking strategically about capital. I was applying these ideas in my own life, just not in the business yet. But a cloud on title situation made something very clear for me. And for those not familiar, a cloud on title simply means there's an issue or uncertainty in the ownership records of a property. And until that issue is cleared up, the transaction cannot move forward. So this situation showed me exactly how financial systems behave when friction appears. Something that should have been a simple real estate transaction suddenly became very complicated. And like most people in that situation, my first reaction was frustration. But it forced me to start asking a different question. How does this system actually work? What I discovered was something most people never think about. The systems we rely on for money, lending, and liquidity are not designed the way most people believe they are. And that moment confirmed something I had already started exploring. I had been studying financial systems and how capital moves, But this experience made it real. It made me realize something important. What most people call liquidity is often just conditional access. You can access your capital as long as someone approves it, as long as banks agree, as long as markets cooperate. That realization pushed me deeper into studying how financial systems are structured, and eventually led me into the banking strategies I focus on today. Not because of theory, but because I saw firsthand how the system actually behaves. When I first started working in the financial space, I was focused on one thing: capital strategy. But as I went deeper, I started to see my place in the bigger picture. Financial outcomes are rarely driven by a single decision. Taxes influence investment outcomes, debt structure influences risk, liquidity determines opportunity, legal structures influence taxes. These pieces interact constantly. So my role, it evolved. I wasn't just helping people make a financial decision, I was helping them understand how the entire system around their capital worked. Wealth isn't one decision, it's a system. Once I understood that, the next question became, how do you actually build a system that works? Something became very obvious. Taxes, legal structures, investments, lending, each of these areas requires deep specialization. So instead of my clients shopping around individually for their needs, I built relationships with specialists in each area: tax professionals, trust and estate attorneys, investment specialists, student loan specialists. Each expert understands their part of the system deeply. My role is helping coordinate those pieces so they work together. Aviation figured this out a long time ago. You have pilots, maintenance, air traffic control, dispatch, weather specialists, the list goes on. And each specialist focuses on their domain. The system works because the specialists are aligned. It doesn't have to be just finance or aviation, though. Think about whatever field you're working in. What is your specialty, and how are you intertwined with others? Shifting gears for just a second. While preparing today, I listened to another presenter. It was an excellent talk overall. But one comment really struck me. Someone asked how he got started and how they could get started. SBA loans came up. And he said, I'm paraphrasing here, if you don't get approved for the loan, maybe your idea isn't good enough. I 100% disagree. Loan officers are not evaluating vision, they're evaluating parameters: collateral, debt ratios, history. Your idea may simply not fit their model. And that doesn't make the idea bad. We often confuse rejected by a system with an invalid idea. Being well capitalized changes who gets to say yes. A classic example here is Walt Disney. A banker told him Disneyland did not make financial sense. We all know where that went. Disney ultimately financed part of Disneyland using loans against whole life insurance policies. He had access to capital, so he didn't have to abandon his vision. And the learning does not stop. A key thing I've learned over time is that systems never stop evolving. And that applies to how we communicate ideas as well. When I first started trying to share what I was doing, I approached it the same way many people do. Post something on social media, hope someone sees it. In my case, I did get lucky. Miss Scarborough actually did see the one post that I had there, and it did resonate with her, but it doesn't resonate with everyone. But that really isn't a system. It's more like throwing things into the wind and hoping they land somewhere useful. Just last month, I attended our annual conference for practitioners in the space, in the infinite banking space. Something became very clear. I wasn't using modern communication tools nearly as effectively as I could. So I stepped back and started rethinking how I get the message out. I do use podcasts already, but now I'm starting to transition to educational videos and short form content through different mediums, different ways of explaining complex ideas so people can actually engage with them. It's still evolving, but the process here is the same as everything we've talked about today. Understand the system, then refine how you operate within it. When you step back and look at the examples we talked about today, a pattern starts to appear. Better outcomes usually follow the same process. First, understand the system. Understand how it currently works. Look at the incentives. Look at the constraints. Look at why things are structured the way they are. Then study it deeply. Spend time operating inside it. Learn where the friction points are and learn what works well and what does not work well. Then question the assumptions. Ask whether the way things are done today still makes sense. Ask whether small adjustments or even big ones could improve the outcome. And only then do you start refining the system. Innovation isn't chaos. It isn't ignoring the system. It's understanding the system well enough to improve it. So before we wrap up and get into questions, I want to leave you with one final thought. Think about one system in your life that you've never questioned. It might be your career path. It might be how you manage money. It might be how a process works inside an organization. Ask yourself, what am I accepting simply because it's standard? Progress often starts with awareness. Once you see the system clearly, you gain the ability to operate inside it differently. If any of the ideas we talked about today sparked your curiosity, I share a lot more of these kinds of concepts in a monthly newsletter. It's focused on systems thinking applied to finance, decision making, and capital strategy. If you're interested, you can scan the QR code and sign up. And of course, I'm always happy to continue the conversation as well. Thanks for taking the time to listen.
Hey, thanks a lot for that presentation, Andy. Really appreciate your thoughts and the background of how you transitioned from your military career into your civilian career and now into a secondary career outside of the flying area, taking what you've learned there. So, I guess what was the actual nexus point? What was the point that you saw started to see the lines of these interconnections and finding different ways to make them work?
Yeah, it's interesting bringing that up. So I have a degree in economics, and I think people get certain reputations, especially when you go to different squadrons, or it doesn't just have to be a squadron for me. That's where I was living and working at the time. It could be whatever organization you're in, but I was kind of the money guy. And I was doing things conventionally and on paper doing quite well, but I did not have access to capital. And I started to find that frustrating. And a good friend of mine actually came up to me in our squadron heritage room, and we have a mutual friend who's actually my mentor now in this space. And he said, "Have you seen what Dave is doing?" And I had no idea. So he gave me a book. I read it that night, and he was actually going to, my buddy that introduced me to this was going to get one of these policies set up. Well, long story short, I read this book and this thing just clicked with me, and it completely changed how I was looking at finances and capital. So that was probably the beginning of it, bringing it into my personal life. And then after getting into that and doing it for a few years and recommending this and pushing a bunch of people to my buddy Dave, I finally had the bandwidth to go into it myself. And I knew I wanted to do something else beyond the military and beyond just flying with Delta. And so this ended up becoming that thing that I wanted to do because I understood it so well and I saw the benefit that it could bring to people. Ironically, that guy that pushed me towards it, I ended up getting a policy and then had to drag him along to get one as well. So he initially showed it to me, but it just really resonated with me. It really clicked. And I think it was because of my background in economics and having such a good understanding of how that system worked and seeing a different way of applying principles that it clicked with me.
Great, thanks for that. And ladies and gentlemen, feel free to go into the chat window and put in any questions that you may have for Andy at this point. You mentioned that when COVID occurred, that the different systems that were changing there, you used that as a catalyst to start looking at some different avenues that were out there. Could you describe that a little bit further
Yeah, sure.
and how that how you started to see those different things come together?
So I think the big thing for me is when that happened, there was a lot of fear, and a lot of people did not know where their financial security was going to come from. And I had that initial reaction as well because you're trying to figure out what's going on. And at that point, I was with Delta for a little over 4 years. I was already considering doing some stuff with the military, and it went from, I have to be careful how I say this because I know that COVID was very difficult for a lot of people, but quite honestly, for me, it became an opportunity that really set me up on a very successful path. And I'm sympathetic to other people that are out there and what they went through. But from a systems perspective, seeing an opportunity there is really what changed things for me. And then it was me, and I think there were 9 or 10 other guys that kind of saw this, and we are all able to get to kind of this same point where we're going back to our other careers, and we have another income stream from the military, from retirement, that allows us to kind of pivot and do things that maybe others can't.
Yeah, you know that it's interesting that you when you're talking about systems, one of the things and the balance between your military and flying for Delta. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you started flying for Delta while you were still in either the reserves or the National Guard, correct? Or no?
Yes.
Yes.
So it was kind of a combination there. I was actually in the Guard at that point, flying the C-130. I'd gotten hired by Delta, and then I transitioned to the reserves during that time, back to the reserves. Yeah.
And that's one of those systems that getting to know the system can really help out. It's one of the things that I talk about quite a bit with people that are looking at a career in commercial aviation is uh, joining the National Guard or the Air National Guard or the Reserve, because typically when we have financial problems in the U.S. industry, the military will tend to have an uptick in its ability to for you to go on an active duty tour, as it would be while you're in the reserves or National Guard. So, could you describe some of the experiences that you had with understanding that system and how it helped you through some of these different time periods where the aviation industry had its downturn?
Actually, yeah. So this COVID was really interesting. So before I came on board with Delta, my plan was to go, and one of the big reasons we moved to the Atlanta area was I thought I was going to become an instructor and teach in the sim. I wouldn't say COVID scared me, but looking at systems, I did not want to put all of my eggs in one basket. And while it would have been very lucrative to go down that road and fairly easy to focus on that, I was worried about something happening down the road and I would maybe lose my career with Delta or have to take a step back. So this transition here, I didn't know I was going to become an infinite banking practitioner, but I knew I was going to do something else outside of just the Delta space to have another income stream. And I can share this here because the one of the other guys that I do the podcast with, this exact situation happened to him. He actually went for an exam. He found out that he had a problem with his heart. Unfortunately, it's been, I think, a 2 or 3 year process, but he found out he is not going to get his medical back. And so he was an instructor on the A330, and he is able to go there. They have a different system where they have instructors that are not part of the line pilots, but it's about an 80% reduction in pay. And so it really hit him quite a bit. And so he's doing the practitioner thing. And I actually have to ask him, I don't know if he was doing that before or after that happened, but he certainly had to pivot to have another source of income coming in to maintain the same lifestyle that he was accustomed to.
As we look at AI joining into all different portions of the world, have you had any experience with AI in aviation or with AI into some of the other areas that you work with? And what has been your experience there? Where do you see it going?
Yeah. So AI in aviation, not specifically with what I'm doing right now. I am I wouldn't say I'm even for or against it. Anything that can amplify and improve what we're doing and understanding how that works in the system, I'm all for it. But I think just jumping in without that understanding, like we talked about these systems, is where you can get in trouble. So you really have to understand it and what's going on there. And we need those experts. I think the difficult part here is you're going to have a group of people on the aviation side and a group of people on the AI side. Do they understand how the other sides work? And so that would be something there. One thing I found, and I'll come back to where I'm using it elsewhere outside of AI, but as far as integration, I remember having engineers and they were looking at some of the different flight gear we had with the A10. So we have the jumpsuit, we have the poopy suit, we have LPUs, all this different stuff. Well, there's a reason why you put on everything differently because in different environments, you want to use one piece or the other. So we had an engineer that built a one size fits all suit, which if you're in Arizona and it's 110 degrees, you don't really want to wear a poopy suit that's integrated. At the same time, if you're somewhere else, you don't want to wear LPUs if you're flying over a desert the whole time. So understanding each system and how they work is really what I'm getting at there, and understanding the needs of the user is probably something. But on the AI side, in my business, I use it all the time. I don't use it as a replacement. I use it as a time saver. So I will put stuff in, get data out. And a lot of the times the data that comes out is about an 80% solution. And if I were to put that out, it would not be what the end user needs, but it saves a lot of time and I can tweak it versus having to start from square one. That's kind of how I see that working now in my business. Yeah.
All right. Thank you for that. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
As we look at different systems that are out there today, and we start to explore different opportunities, what are some connections that you see in the world that maybe the typical person isn't seeing? What are some of those areas, the interconnections that you would tell people to take a look at and see how they work together, or how systems are there that seem to be below the radar?
I'll go back to my business, and if I'm answering this question, hopefully I'm answering the question you want the way you want it. If not, I can pivot and do something different. But I think most people don't realize that everything they do starts with banking. If you don't have capital, you can't do what you're going to do. And how you access that capital can make or break what you're trying to do. And I've seen it in businesses before when times get tight, or even trying to get something off the ground. And so that's why I brought up that SBA loan and what's there. And I think a lot of people with conventional guidance in the way they're operating today, they put barriers between themselves and their capital planning for the future, but it makes them completely dependent on other outside institutions to get things done. And so I've completely pivoted to having capital that is ready to me, and it's allowed me to take advantage of opportunities that I could not take advantage of if I had those barriers between me and, say, 59 and a half or 65 with typical plans that are out there.
All right. Looks like we. Yep. Okay. The You talk about your conversation with your grandmother, and how that was your first time of seeing the different systems or different ways that people move forward. Now, do you feel like you actually understood the full implications of her statement at the time, or was it later on that you finally got the idea of why she had asked that question, or made that statement? And where do you think that you finally came into full understanding of these different systems and people's typical beliefs of how things should work?
Absolutely not. No, I did not understand it. I was 16 years old at the time. I didn't even know what I was going to go to the Air Force Academy. It was something on paper and a vision in my head. And I think most of us have been there before, where you envision something and when you get there, it's actually something very different. And so a lot of this stuff is just reflection. I mean, even preparing for this presentation today, I was trying to think about different stories that are out there, and it got me reflecting on different things. So no, it's much easier in hindsight to look back and see these things, but when you're in the moment, a lot of times you don't see it because it's up close. But what I have found now is, because I do look at systems and I see them differently, it's much easier to see things up front and close now, versus in the past, it would be something that I would notice afterwards. As far as when I started seeing it, I feel like I was one of those people that always kind of pushed against the grain. For example, even when I was looking at doing the exchange with the RAF, that was not your standard course that an aviator would take. Most aviators were told, you're going to do an ops tour if you came into pilot training, then you have to do a white jet or training tour back to ops. And I was just said, why? I don't want to do that. And so I feel like I was always one of those people that would kind of knock on the door, but it wasn't until much later on that I started looking back on systems and how they work and why I questioned it. I think it was just in my DNA and the way I was.
You mentioned earlier about how some of this presentation came about because of LinkedIn. Um, as you looking into things outside of the aviation world, what do you think of programs and apps like LinkedIn and Handshake and other activities like that, or other programs like that? Do you see them as being beneficial for individuals, and what are some experiences you've had with them?
Yeah. I think, just like anything, if you're using them for the right reason, you understand them, they can be very beneficial. I think you can get lost in them and get too focused on it as well. So having that balance is really key. So for example, the slide that I brought up where I was talking about communication, how to get the information out there, I was not doing YouTube at all. and we had a guy speak. And one thing that I found that's been tough for me is when I have clients, I keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And so YouTube now, what I'm doing is I'm building up a library that people can hopefully go there. Now I'm happy to take calls and discuss things because I'm not going to cover everything, but hopefully it's going to give them that foundation so that moving forward, we can use our time more efficiently. Now, what I'm doing with the other social media apps is I'm going to start trying to drive them towards YouTube is kind of my goal there. And that's kind of a main change that I'm doing. Whereas before this, I would do a podcast or I get a cute quote and I'd try and put it out there and try and drive people back. And I didn't understand calls to action, all different marketing type things when I was first starting. But one thing that is really neat is when I go to these conferences, they try and make sure the message is getting out. That's really the most important thing. We really hold ourselves to a very tight set of parameters on how we do stuff so that people on the receiving end get exactly what they're looking for. I think, unfortunately, we've earned a lot of black eyes in this space. There are people out there that do some pretty unsavory things. So trying to trust somebody can be difficult. And so the goal of our organization is to make sure people are doing the right thing. But beyond that, we share a lot as far as what's working, what's not working, so we can use our time efficiently, which is, I think, very non-standard in this industry. A lot of the times it's very close hold on what's working and what's not.
That's some great input there. Thank you very much for that. And it talks about the fact that like aviation has multiple different facets to it that you need to be aware of in order to make it work. In life, you have multiple different aspects that you have to focus on. You could be the best pilot in the world, but if you don't understand other aspects of aviation, then you're not going to be the best aviator. And in talking with finances, you could be the best financial expert in the world, but if you don't know how to transmit that information, how to educate other people and introduce them to it, and if you don't hold yourself to the ethical standards that are required, or your organization doesn't, then that doesn't really matter in the end because people won't trust you for that knowledge or won't understand that knowledge that you have. A question that we just had come in first. I want to thank Sarah has asked two different questions and it's been great. Thank you very much for your questions there, Sarah. And another one: what bottlenecks have you encountered that may be common when challenging a system? So you've found something that's in the system that doesn't seem to quite make sense. You want to challenge it, but what are some of the problem areas that you may encountered there?
I think one of the biggest things I've found is having other people get on board. When you first see something, there are a lot of other people that aren't rethinking their thinking, or maybe they're the ones that came up with the step in the process. And I don't know if it's hubris or what it is, but it can be difficult sometimes for people to accept that. And I'm guilty too. If I come up with something and tells me your idea isn't very good, it can take a minute to step back and actually see that. So I think there's a little bit of tact, and then not just also presenting a problem, but presenting a solution. That's the other side of it. And that RAF Harrier thing that I had, I mean, it was perfect. So quick background on that, because like I said, when I did this presentation, I didn't want to go into the weeds on all of it, but I had shown up and they offered to give me a backseat ride in the Harrier. And I was still a very brand new student. I wasn't even doing the tactical side of it yet. I was just learning how to get the thing off the ground. And when we got back, but I didn't understand close air support because I'd been doing that for quite a long time in the A-10. We got back from that mission and they asked me if I had any inputs. And I realized pretty quickly it was kind of a nice, hey, do you have anything? But this is not a speaking part. You're just supposed to. And so I started giving some input. And a few minutes later, I realized the input wasn't being well received. But after I built up credibility, I'm talking 2+ years, is when I actually got to the point where I could actually bring up force close air support and get a little bit of traction there. And like I said, we didn't really get to the end of it, but it was nice to see that my ideas weren't being shut down. And even if they didn't take it all the way, they were adapting a little bit and seeing benefits of the way I was approaching the problem.
It's a great example there, and real world. I mean, it's something that we deal with all the time, right? You are in a situation, somebody asks for feedback, being able to judge, do they really want that feedback or not? And as you mentioned, people will tend to want to take that feedback when they trust you because of making that connection first and finding ways to make that connection with individuals is always, it's one of the things we talk about quite a bit is, all interactions are human interactions when we're working together. And so oftentimes we think so much about systems that we end up forgetting about the human that's in that system or the humans that are in that system. So always remembering that factor, that human factor that may be there. And in fact, Sarah just asked us a question about human factors and about human factors in aviation. What are some experiences that you've had there that would highlight some of those different human factors aspects that are in aviation?
Okay, I think I understand the question, but and if I'm going off track, I can change it. But I think one of the big things for me was seeing improvements like technology in the way that we employed. So the A10, we were pretty rudimentary in the A model, and the way that we operated, it was, I want to call it archaic, but it was taking a little while to kind of move things along. But we were doing our best. So we had something called the lightning pod and the sniper pod. And the A model, it was all analog, nothing was digital, and we really had to make this thing work. And I don't think we were, I think we were doing the best with the stuff we had, but it was probably slowing us down. As far as the improvements, we had some pretty phenomenal instructor pilots. There was a cadre of about five guys that really came up with the C model. And I had left the A model, went to go do the exchange in the Harrier, and then came back, and now the C model was fully online. And I didn't really see the progress. So it was kind of a binary boom, boom, going from one to the other. And so that human factors in aviation, I was able to take those same weapons with the new integration, and it was night and day what I could do. The speed and the efficiency was incredible. And so that was a system that changed as far as how the integration worked. Hopefully, I'm talking about the human factors there, and that's what they're looking for. And it was kind of a cool way to see it because sometimes things can be so slow that you may not even notice it, but leaving and then coming back, I could see the difference. It was incredible.
And that speaks a lot about how systems change over time and how when you're part of the system, you don't even recognize the changes that'll be there. But if you're out for a while and come back into the system, then all of a sudden it's quite different. So I think of how in on the military side of the house, flying without GPS, flying without other systems like that for many years, hopping back into the civilian world, and then all of a sudden you have not only GPS that's standard, but glass cockpits that are standard in so many of the general aviation aircraft. And while others who have been going through the system for that entire time period saw that as just a gradual change, it became quite a shock to the system for me at first to see all of this great technology that's there sitting in a 172 or heck even a 150 in today's world. So it's a great explanation about the changes and how you view the system's changes are based off of your position within the system, or if you're on the outside for a while. Excellent, excellent. I'll open up the floor real quick for any other questions that we may have for Andy at this point. Feel free to go ahead and throw them in the chat window if you got something else that you'd like to ask Andy about. I don't want to monopolize all the time here.
Just while you're there, we're waiting and we'll see if something comes up. But it just made me think about systems. So when I first started flying at Delta, I was on the 717, and it's a neat airplane, but it's definitely a bit older. And I came back to the 350, and I hadn't been flying 121 for quite a while there. You're talking probably 6+ years. And so not only was I coming back to Delta, a new system, a new way of operating, but a completely different aircraft. And the hardest part about that thing, quite honestly, is getting it off the gate. Once you get all this information into the system, it really is amazing. But there is a lot that goes into just moving that thing off and making sure that everything is loaded properly. Because as we know, if garbage in, garbage out, you got to make sure the right stuff is going into it.
I would first like to thank both of you, Andy and Mr. Eric. Um, so, I am writing a research paper about AI in aviation, and I'd like to know from both of you what do you think is when do you think you see AI in Delta coming up, or what are your thoughts on that? So, I'm going to particularly study about my specialization in my master's program is human factors. And hopefully, in the coming semesters, I would study something about human cognition. And like you mentioned, I am also doing my CFI training. So it's something that I relate to your story a lot. Like from the CFI background, looking at learners, looking at them looking at aviation safety and human factors from a common man's perspective, it's very easy to blame a pilot for a mistake. But there are so many factors that go into consideration, and that's why I'm so passionate about human factors, and that's the reason why I'm asking this question.
Is it coming? Absolutely. How fast and how they're integrated? Gosh, I don't know. If you look at cars, Tesla, any of the different apps that we have out there, if you would have told people 10 years ago that they'd be doing what they're doing, I think they'd probably think you're crazy. But it takes somebody with a vision and getting other people to accept it, right? That's probably the hardest part. I think what is going to be interesting is it's kind of the same thing whether you have one or two pilots on the flight deck or not. Is the general public going to accept it? Are they going to be comfortable with AI running it and doing that type of stuff? I think the technology is probably there. And the other side is going to be cost. I mean, and that works both ways, right? It's going to be expensive to implement it. But when you look, we're expensive. I know we're expensive as pilots. I mean, if you look at our working contracts and what they're paying us, I have no doubt that they're trying to figure out a way to do things more efficiently. So you'd be foolish not to think that that's coming. How that happens, who signs off on it, the politics that are involved. There's so many different pieces that are way above my pay grade, but these are the type of things in that system, coming back to what we're talking about, how do all these things intertwine and how do they work? Somebody's going to make a lot of money doing it. It's not my specialty, but those are the things that I would consider looking at it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, for sure it does. And I totally agree with what you said earlier. I believe the exact same thing you do. Automation has been there in aviation for so long. It's just about knowing what AI is and studying it so much that you just know how to use it in the right direction. It's about which airlines can actually get that AI in the systems and train their pilots efficiently. It's the same as how you would take a learner and bring them to come to a pilot's license as well. My first student actually that I volunteered with was a 64-year-old man who got a private pilot license. So that to me was a huge accomplishment because to see somebody who's 64 years old and get like a private pilot license, which is like the basic level of licensing, it was just a personal achievement. And that really motivated me a lot.
Yeah, when you have a student like that and a good story, yeah, it helps. And I don't care what you're in. You could be in the finance side, you can be the aviation side, it doesn't matter what you're in. But when you have somebody that actually believes in what you're doing and then takes it and implements it themselves and they become successful in whatever it is, yeah, you feel great on the other side of it.
Something that Sarah brought up there, and through the conversation here about AI in aviation, about understanding the system, right? And one of the big things that we're seeing on the maintenance side when it comes to human factors and the use of AI is trust. How good does the system need to be before people trust it? But then how good is too good where people trust it too much, and then it becomes a problem on that side as well. And a lot of that trust factor, when you start to peel back the onion, appears to be, there's still research going on about it now, but it appears to be a lack of confidence as to how the AI system is coming up with these ideas, thoughts, and recommendations that are being provided. And so, again, it's outside of what we were talking about when we talk about systems in general, or in specifics, but when we talk in general about the idea of understanding how systems work, that's going to be a huge aspect when it comes to trust of AI, is understanding how the AI system, how the algorithms are working, how it's getting its information, changing its concepts. I don't know if AI can actually have concepts, but regardless, that comes into the whole other aspect of the of creating a person or a mindset out of AI when it's just ones and zeros that are going back and forth, and figuring out how that system works. So it's a great concept, and a great question that in that research area you're going to have a ton of work in that, Sarah. And through understanding systems, much like what Andy has been talking about here, while it may seem like they're disconnected, there's so much connection that goes in between understanding how the systems work throughout different aspects.
Thank you so much, both Andy and Eric.
Of
Thanks
course.
for the question.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we're coming to the end of time for our presentation today. Monica, I noticed that you had come off of mute a few minutes ago. Did you have a question for Andy?
I didn't. There was someone who had raised their hand early on, but I think they had to drop from the call. I was just going to ask them to go ahead and ask their question. But Andy, thank you very much. Very informative. Being able to challenge systems, being able to pivot, being able to be agile, I think is a message everyone resonated well with everyone. And I think everyone should consider that because I think when you and I met, we had talked about if you're an airline pilot, you're going to get furloughed at some point. So you need to be able to pivot. So I think that's a great message for our students and for everyone on the call.
Hopefully not, but yeah, hopefully we're not all looking at furlough. But yeah, no, you want to have a backup plan 100%, right? So plan for the worst, hope for the best type of thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks for that, Monica. And Arnold, do you have anything that you'd like to end with today? Oh, you're muted still.
Thank you again. Andy, thank you again so very much. Really enjoyed this and appreciate the interaction from our guests. And we also want to say thank you to Dr. Eric Rouse, always being there. Great facilitating as well. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate Monica for connecting with you. Just one brief announcement. I put it in the chat. If you happen to be in the Savannah, Georgia area on March 28th, that's a Saturday, we have an Embry-Riddle social mixer that we will be sponsoring from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. If you're anywhere in the area, we invite you to come out. We'll definitely have Northrop Grumman on board. We'll have someone else from Delta as well who will be, he's an Embry-Riddle alum as well. So they're all over the place. So Andy, if you happen to be in the area, we'd love to see you. We have our alumni folks, our enrollment folks, our CCPD career services team, and come out and get some great food and just to have some great social networking. Thanks again, and back to you, Eric.
All right, thanks for the update about the social the social mixer that's coming up here at the end of the month. I am tracking that we have our next alumni webinar, our next alumni guest speaker program is going to be the 28th of May, I believe it still is, with Ryan Timmer of Delta Airlines. We're gonna have a 1 month break in the month of April, and then be back again in May, looking at different aspects of how do you coordinate. Again, looking at systems, right? How do you coordinate all of those different systems that take you around, that take that piece of luggage completely around the world and back again to the same person that it started out with, at least most of the time. I've had a little bit of bad luck lately, but it's all in all, I've eventually gotten my stuff back. But as we continue to expand out, especially into more and more aviation that's going on around the world. Well, thank you once
Eric?
again. Go ahead. Yes.
Yes, there may be an update to that, but we'll definitely put that out. It may be April 9th, but I will confirm that again with Monica and the rest of them. But we will
Okay.
definitely follow up on yes with Timmerman, Randy Timmerman. Absolutely.
So, so regardless, we will have something coming up in a little bit, and we're going to go ahead and talk on those aspects on our next guest webinar. So, thank you very much, Andy. Do you have any last words that you wanted to before we close out today's session?
I always put an air tag in my bag. It does help finding your luggage.
There we go. Air tag. Air tag. Awesome.
No, thank you,
Awesome.
thank you. I really appreciate you guys having me out here, and hopefully everybody got something out of it. And yeah, reach out if you want to connect. If not, I hope you get something out of it anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate your time today, Andy. Appreciate the work that Arnold and Monica put into this. And thank you all for joining us today and listening to the discussion about rethinking your thinking and how all of the different systems, when you understand the system, you can understand how to get to the best end that you're looking for. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.